it's really good having you here.
It's good to be here. We've been talking about this for a while. I'm glad we finally found the time.
2 semesters now.
Yeah, we've been trying to find a time that works. So.
But like during the last day, before the last day of classes and everything and exams.
Yes.
So how it's been?
It's been good. It's been good. Thanks for asking. I'm excited to talk about all the topics that you have in mind.
Yeah.
It's been good. It's been a crazy year for me. I mean, this is my first year at AUIS, as I'm sure people have known.
Yeah.
And I've learned a lot along the way. And I think third semester is going to be the charm. I'm going to hopefully synthesize all the information that I've gathered in my own classes as far as how to teach well and how to reach the students here. So I think coming back in the fall, I'll be even more on firm footing when it comes to my teaching. But so that's primarily what's been on my mind. But everything else, I mean, has been so great. The people here are so welcoming and generous. I've had nothing but positive experiences here so far. So
and this is not like your first time being here in Iraq.
That is correct.
Yeah, you worked before like in a media organization before this. So like how was working as like a journalist versus like being a teacher in this country?
Yes. Well, they're two very different domains altogether, just even comparing journalism and teaching on top of then, the regional distinctions of what it's like being a journalist here. And I should preface everything by saying that, I was primarily... It was a short stint. It was about 6 months or so of work. And I came out with, 5 or so articles. And it was my first journalism position altogether. So it was a first for me in a lot of regards. So absorbing it, I think I only absorbed what happened like probably a year after I was out of it because it was such a hectic experience.
Yes.
I remember it was my first impression of journalism. It was also my first impression of the country, having been, being here. This was in Erbil. And I worked for Ridha.
Yes.
And, my impression coming from Canada at the time, I had a very sort of multinational, multicultural upbringing, but primarily, based in the West. And when I came to Erbil at the time, this was 12 years ago.
Yes.
So as you know, I'm sure the country was very different and the political climate was different too. And the first thing I noticed when I was interviewing people, talking with people in the marketplaces, and one of my first articles was about the withdrawal of U.S. troops from the country, and what did people think about it? Did they feel positively? Did they feel negatively? Did they have worries, concerns, apprehensions? And it was so amazing to hear people be so politically savvy and involved. Every person that you would go to, from the rug merchant at the marketplace, everyone had deep and rich opinions that were actually, in many cases, quite informed. And that was surprising to me as someone who came from some of the political discourse happening in the West, where I don't feel like people had that grit. I think politics was something very real for people.
Yeah.
They knew, in some cases it threatened their livelihood. In some cases they knew people who had died, close relatives. So this was not posturing or theory for people.
And like the thing is also about, like you talked about, like the US taking back their troops.
Yes.
And like because like it's started, like there was like this difficult and like this tyranny happening.
Yes.
And like most people wanted to like get rid of this and like be freed of this.
Right.
But like it came at a cost, which is like through an invasion.
Yes,
so like
of course.
people have these mixed feelings, like okay, we want to get liberated, but like we don't want to get invaded as well. There must be a middle ground. So
Absolutely.
that was like the discussion back in the time.
Yeah. That was the impression I got too. Overall, I would say in terms of numbers, it was like a very informal kind of survey that I did.
Yeah.
Most people felt positively about the US troops, or at the very least for pragmatic reasons, they wanted them to stay a little bit longer before they felt that they were leaving a little bit too early in order to give them some time to set things into motion. But I would agree with you that overall, I mean, I can only imagine what people were going through at the time. I only saw my own little glimpse of it. So,
like, let's step back a bit.
Sure,
So, like, you got like your bachelor and like your master's in Canada. That's right.
That is correct. Yeah.
So, like, how is that? Like, I think now you have been like through some universities here as well, like in the region.
Yeah.
So like, how is that different from Canada?
How do the universities compare? Well, that's an interesting question. I think the one thing that strikes me as being quite different is probably the campus life.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to go to a wide variety of schools in Canada, from a small liberal arts school where it was only 1,000 people, I think, to then transitioning halfway through my bachelor's to a very large school in Canada that was almost the size of a small city. It's University of British Columbia.
Yes.
Huge campus, so many things going on. So I think, and then, the one thing that I think people always want to promote, and I'm, doing my bit to promote this too, is to promote the campus life here.
Yeah.
I wish students had the opportunities that I was able to enjoy in some of those campuses. I think that's maybe the first thing that comes to mind is I wish there was more of a support network. And I think it's growing, right? And we have to give time. Yeah. AUIS is still a very young institution in that regard. But I think I would like to see more of that, and that is the starkest difference. I think.
I've noticed this since I we came back here after COVID.
Right.
I talk about this always, how like the activities, the extracurricular activities that were one of the standing points of AUIS.
Right.
This is why you would get a liberal arts education.
Right.
Was pretty much absence, and it wasn't there.
Yeah.
But now there is so much energy and work putting into these things, and it's not the best. I've heard back in the days it was much better than now.
Right.
But it's definitely better than 1 or 2 years ago.
Gotcha.
Because back then it was only a couple of clubs operating, but now there are pretty cool events, from the football tournament to the clubs and the activities, and there is every week there is this thing going on.
Yeah.
So that's really relieving and fun for the students.
Yeah, one thing I will say is I absolutely am impressed by the initiatives that students are taking to solve that problem. When I say that, I meant primarily in terms of like infrastructure, what the institution itself can do to support, right? But what the students are doing and the clubs that they're doing, the events, I love it. I mean, it's just they're so energetic.
Yeah.
I've only experienced AUIS in the post-COVID era, so I don't even know what it's been like before in the golden age, let's say. But I can imagine that it was pretty active then too. So
so you did your masters in MC, right?
It was
masters?
McMaster University was the university. It's just outside of Toronto.
Yeah.
Fairly big city in Canada, and that's where I did my master's. Yeah.
And how would you describe the difference between doing bachelor's and doing your master's for students who are interested in getting higher education?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
I think that is going to be very domain specific, very discipline specific.
Yeah.
So I can only speak to what English and literature might have been, what it's like, the difference. My master's degree was specifically in English and cultural studies. So it was a very kind of, in its nature, interdisciplinary kind of humanities-based education.
Yeah.
Very heavy on the seminars, on high-level discussions, where you really got to pick the brain of our professors, our teachers who are very good in their field, and small, intimate classrooms, where we get to test and field our ideas, right? We write response papers, for example, lots of writing, lots of reading, of course, that is literature. And then you field your ideas out to the group, and people workshop it, tell you where they disagree, where they agree, and you have those sorts of discussions to refine your ideas. It's like workshops to develop your own theories and understandings of whatever it may be, some cultural phenomena, whether environmental studies. That was one of the focal points of the degree in my case. There were other things, so many other interesting topics. So it's about kind of being a critic of culture, and someone who can look around and see past the surface and understand how things operate in terms of, whether it be human relations or whether it be cultural production, artwork, movies, stories, and where are the trends going? How can we explain these trends? Right?
Yeah.
That was kind of the work that we did in my master's. So the difference, I think, is a lot more independence, you really have to put your best foot forward. Not as much hand holding, I would say. I had way more fun in my master's
than in your bachelor's.
Yeah, the bachelor's. I mean, I had so many things to do that were also outside of my domain.
Because you also have to take like core classes.
Exactly, core classes
and stuff,
which are all great. But I felt almost, and maybe not everyone had this experience, but I felt like I had more freedom and more opportunities to guide my own education during my master's degree. And so I actually found it more enjoyable. And then my PhD was the favorite the favorite part. Usually you would think that it gets harder and harder.
Yeah.
In my case, it got more and more enjoyable, I think. I think because you really get, especially at the PhD level, you really get to just pursue what fascinates you. And you're given, all the freedom, especially when you're done with your exams and so on, and you're just working on your dissertation. You read everything you want to read, you've ever wanted to read, to find out to your obsession and explain.
To like answer that thesis.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that was my experience. It got progressively more interesting. If you're into independent thinking, critical thinking, you're a curious individual, you will find yourself more and more at home, I think, the higher you go in academics.
Yeah. You also speak Russian. So what's the backstory of that?
It's a good question. Yeah, so that comes back to my multicultural upbringing.
Yeah.
I was born originally in Belarus, Eastern Europe.
Okay.
I was only a few years old, I think 2 or maybe even less, when my parents moved to the States. So I didn't really grow up there. But there was Russian sort of in the household. My first language was English. Okay. They put me then around age of 5 or 6, we moved to Canada.
Okay.
I was put into a French school for 5 years. I learned French in Quebec. And then when I was at the age of 11, this is where the Russian comes in. At the age of 11, my parents moved to Kazakhstan, which is in Central Asia. Yeah. It's a Russian-speaking country primarily, though they have their own language, Kazakh as well. And I was put into a Russian school. I had about a month to learn the alphabet. And then they put me into the regular curriculum, the regular program. So I don't think I learned anything in the classes for about 3 years. So
it was like basically APP in a nutshell.
It was a what?
It was APP in a nutshell.
Yeah. It was, yes. That's a similar experience I hear from APP students. Yeah. So thrown into the deep end, but it was an immersion experience for sure. And I learned the language really quickly that way. And that's where I picked it up. And ever since then, I'm able to talk in Russian fluently with other relatives who speak Russian.
Is it different to read Russian work rather when you read it in its native language and its mother tongue?
Absolutely.
I guess that's it gives more of the when you read something in Arabic and then you would read the translated in English, it loses some of its essence.
Yes.
Let's say.
Yes.
But once you read it the language that it was intended to be in, you hear the music and the tone behind the words.
And there's so much history in the connotations of words that can never be captured unless you've been with the language and grown up with it. So I think that's the primary thing, is the texture, the connotations of words, the way that the words sound, compared to other similar words phonetically, and cultural associations that only come with the culture. If you don't have the culture, you don't have the associations that come with certain words. So I think it's certainly more rich. Although I must say that in the post-Soviet style education system that they put me through, it's very disciplinarian, it's very rigorous, and I don't think I enjoyed anything that was assigned to me when I was read, because it was so strict.
It wasn't as much as free critical thinking as
precisely.
You prefer.
It felt more, in many cases, more like memorization or so it was a bit overwhelming as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old. So I haven't read as much Russian literature in the native language as I would like. I find myself, sadly, reading Dostoevsky, for example, in English, although I could easily switch, and I should. I need to find more opportunities to do that. Yeah.
And you just mentioned the difference of memorization style and having to critically and freely independently think about stuff, and I think a lot of students struggle with this when they join this university, especially because our schools are strictly based on memorization and how you would answer that filled out sheet of questions. So when you come here and you start writing essays and a lot of students struggle with this. I've talked with a lot of students who say it's not easy to write essays. Because like you have to think, and like most students aren't used to this, and like it also gets back to like the historical background and like how people weren't encouraged to think for themselves. So like when you go through this and like you go through the experience of like putting your thoughts together and like writing them down, because like writing is like thinking, but like it's like written down.
Absolutely.
And like how you connect these ideas to come to a conclusion. So that's a bit challenging for students. Like for me it was easier because like I was already familiar with the language, and like I already had like some readings before getting in.
I was gonna say, was that your experience in high school as well, or were you able to have more of a kind of liberal arts style?
Like for high schools, like all around the country, it's like pretty similar. Like there are some like institutions from like it's like some Turkish schools or like some British schools, but like it all comes down to the final like higher education exam. So like you have to get a good average in that to get into, it's like similar to the SATs and stuff.
Exactly.
So it's like pretty heavily dependent on like memorization. But like I wasn't really comfortable with that. Like I didn't like it as much, and like I was getting like full grades in like English without even studying for it, because like it was so easy for me. So it was a bit easier for me when I started here, like, and I really had like a good experience when joining in. Like I went through the APP program for one level, like it was level 3, and that was really helpful. And because like for I think it's 10 weeks for each level. So like for these 10 weeks, like we got adapted to the way of the like they really taught us how to be a college student. It wasn't only like learning the language and like writing essays. You were taught like how to get to class on time. You were taught how to it was like the liberal arts system, and like it was a nice tunnel to it. But it was pretty interesting.
So I mean, I want to pick your brain a little bit too, because when you brought up that topic of how do we reach these kids, how do we get them to learn critical thinking, especially when it's been so underemphasized. Man, that's the number one question as a teacher I'm facing right now. I'm hoping to use some of this summer to do a sort of tactical retreat, rebuild my syllabi, right, and kind of go at it again. Each of my semesters, and my students will know this, we're different. We're quite different, because my first initial approach, there were issues. I tried a different approach. There were different issues, slowly refining, but I'm trying to answer exactly the question that you're raising. So like in your experience, because you've been, part of the education system here, you see some of its deficiencies perhaps in that regard. What do you think, is it simply a personality or a disposition in terms of like some people perhaps are more aligned towards that natively, or not, like it's a personality trait, introversion or introspectiveness or something? Or do you, or like what in your own experience is what kind of singled you out to enjoy? I mean, you, for example, you enjoy movies, right? I think we were hoping to talk a little bit maybe about criticism as well, but you enjoy analyzing these things. So what, is there something in your childhood that brought that up out of you, do you think? Or, like what was it in your case?
Like for sure, like personality and like your true self is like has a high contribution to that. But I think also if you had like some like during your education process, like if this was emphasized, I think we would be better at critical thinking, because like as I said, like the education system doesn't emphasize this, and like even the essays that we write on like whether it's in mostly the English essays, like we have these, like there are 10 pieces in this in the whole like 12th grade, and 90% of the students like just memorize every essay to like write about it. We had one about like why cigarette advertising should be illegal, and like you find like classes like they would be writing the same piece of work over and over again, because like they are not able enough to produce essays. That's why it's so difficult for them when they move actually to college. Like I have friends who are like in the south in universities, but like English isn't emphasized as much as in here, where like they still like study in, like they would get the materials in English, but they would translate it and study it in Arabic. And that's one of the things that's like pretty good about like this university is like the high emphasis on English, and like how you need to change to learn this new language and to think with it, which is like pretty difficult, because like you're not just memorizing and like understanding the words, you are thinking, which is like the highest level of like being involved with the language. So for sure, like your self and like your personality has a huge role in it, but like I think if the education system want to change the quality of the students, because like I think now it's an issue, like we have so many graduates in the popular fields like medication or like engineering, where like a lot of students are just unemployed now. So they're like branching out. So I think it should be like, of course, like people should work on themselves, but like the higher education systems and stuff, they should like start trying to shift the narrative.
For sure.
But like it's also highly dependent on our society and like how we view like majors outside the popular one. And like I think like you know about this, like how the hierarchy of majors in the East here. So it's one of the issues, I think, and it's like should start from like, I don't know, the parents, the education system, or like from like every person would like do it on their own. But like for sure there is a high number of students who are not doing what they enjoy because of like their parents and stuff.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, because I do agree, like in my own struggle as a teacher, trying to meet the students halfway, not overwhelm them with all this stuff and then make them feel lost, disoriented, but so kind of bridge those worlds of more structural type learning, repetitive memorization learning, but then to kind of give them little openings, opportunities within that to, okay, here's your own thinking. How can you synthesize, the more structural, formal type stuff with the actual thinking independently? So I'm wrestling with that. But when you're saying, it's societal, it's expectations, it's a matter of values as well. I, in my little corner, I'm going to be doing what I can to promote that. But I agree that there's social expectations too about what is valuable, and why do we take majors? What is education? Right. If education is just a stepping stone to get a job, that's one thing, and there's nothing wrong with having a job. But is that all that education does? And so I think if we use education as a stepping stone to get something else, a degree, a piece of paper to then get a job, to then get money, none of which is wrong, but it does kind of reduce the essence of education to then just be a tool. And if it's a tool to get what you want, it becomes, everything becomes technical. The knowledge that you have to learn is all about technical expertise.
But terminologies, methodologies.
And most
them.
Exactly. And most of that can be taken care of by repetition and memorization. It doesn't really require right. So medical type work, engineering type work, extremely challenging, difficult career paths. But is it a lot? There, in some cases, the entrepreneurial side of things, yes, you do have to be creative. But I think it's a matter of what is, philosophically speaking, even education about. And if people are able to see that it's something that could be intrinsically rewarding and not only to get an outcome, that I think is where doors open to then. I think that's the quality that is present in like students who would like seek higher education and like expand on their knowledge and stuff. It's a cultural thing too. It's the university system is its own kind of culture that I think you have to have the right orientation towards. You're coming into a world where a lot of it is about self-cultivation. Right? And the sad thing is, when you get out of university, there aren't spaces like that out there in day-to-day life, in adult life, where you have dedicated time to build yourself and your understanding of the world, I think that's an exciting time. I think if people realize that this is a unique opportunity, the university, then there will maybe be that shift that we're discussing about value in education for its own sake.
More than
thinking.
it's just a stepping stone towards
precisely
getting a job. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So in your your master's thesis was about like criticism.
Yes.
Yeah. So why do you think it's that important when it comes to the literary work and?
That's fascinating question. So criticism, for people who may not be too aware, there's all kinds of contending definitions, but let's just say that it's the ability to understand and interpret and evaluate, also judge cultural objects, let's say, because there's literary criticism, which is what I specialize in. You pick up a book, you pick up a comic book, you pick up a screenplay, for that matter. There's a story, there's elements, and we all have an intuitive knowledge of like, this was an amazing movie, or this book blew my mind, and this one was really boring and dry, didn't do anything for me. So that means there are hidden criteria by which we make that judgment. There's a structure, there's something.
It either clicks or not.
Yeah, exactly. And so in some ways, criticism can be many things, but in some ways it's understanding what makes things click, what makes a story a good story.
So explaining the why behind.
Precisely, going behind deeper, levels deeper than just sort of absorbing, reading a book, closing it, actually thinking about how does it work and how is it able to achieve its effect and what it's trying to do on a deeper level. And within that, there's so many different directions you can go. But I think that's kind of the value of criticism. I think that it goes, if you can do it well in literature or in film criticism or in any one domain, it extrapolates, it applies, it generalizes to elsewhere in life, where you can be a critic of life, of even your own decisions, even yourself interpreting why you do things, seeing yourself as a character in a story, and understanding your own motives, understanding other people's motives, and understanding phenomena in the world, making connections, the kind of looking past the surface to see the underlying structures of things. I think that's what criticism, in a nutshell, allows us to do, is to understand where we're at and why we do things. The why question, I think, is critical.
And for me, the thing is for in my experience, after I finish reading something or mostly watching a movie, I would go out to on the internet and search about reviews about it or articles about that.
I do the same.
And it's really interesting to see how people would see it from their own lens.
Oh yes.
Because we all see that 2 hours duration motion picture, but everyone sees it through their lens. So that would add to the experience. But I saw a movie last year. I don't know if you heard about it. It's called The Menu.
The Menu?
The Menu, yeah.
Don't think I have.
Yeah, it's a movie about the Critics Society, and it's how it's easier to be a critic than to actually do work. So that's always in the back of my mind. Okay, we sit down and we talk about movies and we criticize them, and this was bad and this was good. But when you are sitting next to someone who's actually doing that, they are operating at another level. You are just criticizing them. So there is of course I highly understand the value that comes out of criticism, because if we just collab for every work, there would be no advancement in that field. But the next level of it, it becomes highly reliant on critics. Because there are movies that they're decent, but because of the critics and how the reviewers field is operating right now, they didn't get high reviews, so no one watched them, and they bombed. So there's always this battle of criticism is important, but too much criticism, and because a lot of people and you can't judge them, because we live in a fast world, and not everyone has the chance to invest 2 hours into something that's not highly reviewed or not highly critically acclaimed. So criticism is important, but then the next side, if it's too much, then you are damaging the work on its own.
That's fascinating. So I'm really interested in that question. I've explored that a lot in my own work too. The relationship between criticism and creativity. That would be one way of framing it, between artists and critics. There's an interesting legacy. I think the best of both worlds is because sometimes artists are their worst. Are not good critics. I don't know if you've noticed that. They have no idea how their art works, and they don't know, right? They're very kind of instinctive almost and kind of intuitive in how they work, and they don't necessarily understand the underlying mechanisms. Critics can understand the mechanisms, but maybe not apply them, for example, or understand them from the inside. They only understand them from the outside. I think both. I think both are absolutely required. I think that it has to do maybe with something about the almost. You could think of it as the two hemispheres of the human brain. You could think of it as the analytical brain, which is meant to consciously understand and see structures and understand the why. And then there's something that's more about being in the process,
more on the how side of it.
And also more embodied, more intuitive. It's less about understanding and more about doing. And I think in a perfect world, we would have, as individuals, we would have both of those faculties developed and tightly linked. So I think there's a good tradition of literary critics who are also writers, for example. And I think it opens up all sorts of possibilities. It's almost like, in one way of putting it, is the difference between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. I think a lot of artwork and inspiration comes from a place that we don't necessarily fully understand rationally. You get an idea, you get a notion, you have a gut feeling about what you need to do in this scene, right? How you need to write it correctly. And then after the fact, you can go back and analyze and actually discover things about your own process that you wouldn't have realized until you applied your rational, analytic, critical side of yourself. So I think the two can be in harmony. I think they can also be disconnected from each other, and then that's where you get the fight between artists and critics. So that battle that you're describing happens, I think, within each of us too. Like sometimes you can be overly rational, and then we get creatively cramped. If you've been in the mode of criticism and then you try to produce artwork, and you haven't done it in a long time, it's like you become your own worst critic. You can't even write the first page. So I'm really interested in that, because my first love before I got into literature and literary theory was creative writing. That was actually what my initial
and like you do degree. Workshops right now. You help students with
that's correct.
Stuff.
We've been doing that with regards to our in preparation for our literary journal that has come out that we're really proud of. Jamali and myself and a whole team of students here were helping with that. And we're going to open up, I think we're going to try to revitalize the Creative Writing Club next in the fall. And that's where I'll be, me and also Miss Jamalia from the English department will be hosting creative writing workshops. I'm really excited for that to help our writers. Though they're few and far between, still it helps to have workshops and help each other out. So creative writing, I would say, is my first love. Literary theory is a supplement to that. And so I'm very interested in what you're describing. The critic, how can we make the critic and the artist work together, cooperate? They seem to be working towards a shared goal of some kind. So they don't have to be cross purposes all the time.
I think I might disagree on something here.
Go for it.
You talked about how there are some artists who are not good critics.
Right.
I think currently when it comes to authors or pretty popular filmmakers, I think they are pretty good critics, because they for let's take Quentin Tarantino, for example. He started selling movies in a video store. So he has been exposed to all of these different genres and different styles of filmmaking. So just by being exposed to that, you become some kind of a critic, because you know what works for you, and you know what you like, and you find your own style in between. So you have to be I had a conversation with Dr. Shoman previously, and she talked about how important reading is, and being exposed to different styles of writing to find out what you like, and find your own style. So I think some of them they don't know how to assess what went wrong in their own work.
Yes.
But there are like ones that are like pretty highly critical of their work. Like there are authors like who would go back and like rewrite every single sentence of their work, or like stuff like that, because like they are so perfectionist, and like they seek to produce that perfect sentence and put it in that perfect page to make the perfect book. And like
those are my kinds of people.
Yeah, and like that's why it takes them so long to make it, and like to produce in a world where like we're in the fast media, fast everything, and like let's scroll up until infinity.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think being a good critic will really help you, and like you are not lying to yourself. Like that's like that's the essence of it.
Yes.
Like you are not deceiving yourself into something that it's not. It is, or like it's you.
Yeah, and there's so many temptations if we want to talk about the creative process, right? Whatever it is, whether you're painting, doing music, whether you're writing. In my case, it's mostly writing.
Yeah.
There's so many temptations to, turn a blind spot to some of your own creative weaknesses or the work, and because it's hard to admit that, man, I need to rework 90% of this, right? I need to scrap and start over.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the critic who's able to see very honestly is extremely helpful. So I think we're in agreement. I think that the best artists are ones that can be good critics. Exactly. I think Tarantino is a great example of someone who does that. I think at the extremes you have critics who don't produce anything but are and then you also have artists who are like, oh, I don't want to even think about my work is so precious that I don't want to even think about it. You can't understand,
that's like sums it up like perfectly.
So those are the two poles we want to avoid, and we want to be somewhere where the two are working together.
Yeah, where like we would have critics who like are understanding of like how their reviews would like affect the artwork itself. And like we would have artists who would like put into consideration how people and critics would like perceive their work.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
So you talked about also like in your thesis, which like I'm bringing a lot now.
Oh yeah.
You talked about like existentialism.
That's correct.
Yeah, and like this is what I want to like use this as like stepping stone into like the next part of this episode, which is like philosophy.
Let's go for it.
Because like currently I've seen like an uprise in like stoicism and like how it's becoming more popular in our generation, and for good reasons. And like I think it's pretty helpful to be aware of that like school of thought, and like how you would evaluate things in your life and not take everything into personal level, and like shift your perspective. And so how was that, and like how did you?
Well, so really interesting. The Stoic connection too is a fascinating phenomena.
Yeah,
all over. We were talking earlier before the podcast. All sorts of influencers and people. I'm trying to think of some names.
Marcus Aurelius,
the actual Stoics, but like Tim Ferriss, I think, like contemporary influencers are bringing up this stuff, right? So it's fascinating. I have my encounters with Stoicism. I wouldn't say I've read their whole corpus or anything, but I've read some Marcus Aurelius meditations and so on, and a few others. But I think there's a sense of like wanting to shoulder your burdens in a noble way.
Yes.
Because we're all hit with all sorts of things in life that we cannot control, that are difficult. And the art of bearing your suffering in a noble way, in a dignified way, I think appeals to a lot of people. And this sort of, ancient tradition that's been rediscovered as part of that interest in doing suffering well, I would say, or nobly, right? Like, I think there's a lot to that. And when it comes to my master's about existentialism, I have to rewind the clock. It's been a long time since I wrote that thing, but it had to do with literature and genres of literature and kind of new trends that are emerging now in the 21st century and 2010s and beyond. I'm not sure if you're familiar with postmodernism in general as a kind of literary movement, but also in other art, right? So it's kind of the idea of, there's many things, but one of the things is the relativity of different perspectives, or the idea that that meaning is constructed and we create our own worlds, to put it briefly and loosely. And my exploration in that master's project was looking at these different to use a really botched up term, a postmodern movements that are emerging in response and in reaction to that. One of them being something called metamodernism, which has some issues. I don't necessarily I don't classify myself as a meta-modernist, but there's some interesting philosophical trends in that movement of kind of being ironic in the postmodern way, where the postmoderns are like, all meaning is constructed, nothing is really real in that way, right? Yes. Where the metamodernists kind of realize that irony, they have that self-awareness that the postmodernists do, but they still buy into what they're creating as if it was real. So there's like a sincerity to it that was lacking in the postmodern type content. A simple example that comes up a lot is the Wes Anderson films, if you've ever seen those. Yeah. So there's a way in which it's constructed and artificial. Yeah,
and like how the cadre, like how each scene is like constructed
like a painting
perfectly.
Almost.
Exactly.
Yeah, the cinematography really highlights how it's artificial.
But like the thing is, like I sort of interrupt here. With like Wes Anderson movies, like there is a story in the background.
Precisely.
Like these like beautiful scenery is like adding to the story.
Precisely.
Whereas like yesterday I was like watching one of these like artistic movies like for the critically acclaimed people and like,
avant-garde cinema.
Yeah, so like it was only beautiful scenery, like there was no story, and that's my issue with it. Like
I have the same issue.
Yeah, so like if like it's I encourage like this kind of like productions, but like at least it needs a story to like moves the movie around, because like you are sitting for 1 hour 2 hours however it's gonna be, but like you need something to keep you pushing and like to keep you enticed into the project.
I agree. And I think the postmoderns, in all the various forms of art within the postmodern vein, were like kind of pushing back against that, or saying like, how much can we question? How much can we deconstruct? Maybe stories are all kind of, we don't need stories. We're beyond stories, right? And I think and that's why I brought up Wes Anderson, is that he has those same postmodern tendencies of being ironic and self-aware and kind of making fun, self-referential, making fun. We're very aware that we're watching a movie, but he does not give up the story and the sincerity and the emotions. And that is what I was exploring in my master's project, was this new trend where it's like same, like the movie or the show, I should say, The Office.
Yes.
That was
I love that show, by the way.
Yeah, so that's actually kind of part of this new trend where it's like, yes, it's artificial. They're looking at the camera. We know that this is kind of set up, but you sincerely buy into it over time, and it's like a real drama, right, between characters, and funny and entertaining. So that's what metamodernism I was exploring, that trend, and existentialism was the deeper subcurrent philosophically, like the tradition of thought that I think metamodernism was now diving and tapping into. So this idea of almost embodying the artwork in a way.
Yes.
Understanding that meaning may be constructed or relative, but to sincerely give yourself completely, that may be one kind of very abstract way of putting it.
Yeah.
But there's something about embodying that in a way that makes it real and sincere, and no longer this kind of ironic distance between the artist and the artwork, or the viewer and the artwork. Rather, that distance is trying to be bridged. So those are the high-level ideas that I was kind of exploring.
Yeah, you talked about like The Office, and like the thing for me that made it so popular, it's because like you had like these moments with each character, and within like you have seen the show, right?
Oh, of course.
You have like these moments with every character, and like it's not you observing like their interactions together. You have these like one-on-one moments with them, where like you get to know each character within like its own, and like after like the structure of each episode is like something happens, and then like you would have every character commenting on it, and like preserving it in a different way, which like I think made the show. And like right now, do you know the TV show Succession? It's
I might have heard of it, but I don't think I've seen
it's an HBO TV show, and like it's one of the best like shows on television right now. It's it aired its final episodes a couple of days ago, and like it's about like this media conglomerate company, but like you see it from the point of view of like the main patriarch of the family, and like his children, and like the tension between them about like who's going to be the successor of the company.
I see.
So like that's a very interesting idea, but like their approach to that idea was not through like showing the extravagance of their life. It was like by zooming in on the characters and like having shaky camera, because like you would be in this perfect setting, but like the conversations that you are having and like the interactions are like weird to you. Because like you're not used to this, so like you feel like out of place. So like because like usually with like this high level multi-millionaire companies and stuff, like you would have like a fixed camera and like a fixed setting and everything. But like they approached it differently. Like they were shooting there was a video about looking into how they shot The Office, and like how it was like shaky camera and like people moving around and like so that's what made the show, and like it succeeded in the past, and I think it's resurfacing now with other works, and like it's also making them great.
That's interesting. Yeah, the whole shaky camera, handheld thing, the whole sort of like almost a grassroots production where it's just kind of low budget, I think is interesting. I mean, I remember watching Blair Witch Project, very different genre, very different, but that created a huge kind of uprising in that genre and like a lot of interest. That was an interesting time in cinema, I would say. So yeah, it's probably coming back. I could see that happening.
So also like when I was doing a bit of research yesterday about like the episode, like you talked about like existentialism.
Yes.
And like I searched about like how it was like a response to essentialism, basically. So like essentialism was like the previous school thought, like where we would be born with an essence, or like we would have an essence within ourselves. But like with existentialism, you actually are going to find that meaning, or like you are going to construct it. So that's the two different things between like these two.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. And these are very broad trends. And, you know, as we get more into the details, you see there's all sorts of interesting tensions and differences. But as in broad strokes, I would agree that what existentialism is doing is kind of highlighting the contingency or the uncertainty, or what Martin Heidegger, the philosopher, would call the thrownness. So he would describe life or our existence as sort of we're thrown into this without understanding why or how or what, and we don't really have a say, but we just have to keep going, even though kind of how we got here, everything else is left kind of a mystery or a blank. And so that's where the participation and construction of meaning kind of comes in, where it's more, we play a more active role in the participation or construction of meaning, let's say. Whereas essentialism, very broadly, would be where, you know, everything has its own nature. It could be people have their own nature or essence. It could be also things, like there's an essence of a table. There's the idea of a perfect table, right? You might think back to the philosopher Plato, who talked about the ideal forms, right? Everything has a perfect form of itself, and that's its true essence, its true nature. Whereas in existentialism, things are much more in play and a little bit less fixed or static. That could be probably one way of putting it. You know, there's a lot to say about existentialism, and there's a lot of interesting tensions. You think of a Camus, right, or a Sartre, who they're exploring, you know, without, you know, given an absence of meaning, how can we move forward as if there is meaning, or, you know, have a heroic response in many ways to an underlying absence of meaning, or a kind of nihilistic worldview. Existentialism is like trying to react against nihilism, which says that there is no meaning at all to anything. So it's kind of taken a heroic stance, right? A good image is this is Camus, who said, if you're aware of the myth of Sisyphus, right? This mythical figure who's pushing a giant boulder up a mountain. And he keeps pushing it, but the thing is, once he's done, it's just going to roll back down. So he has to keep doing that, and it rolls back down, and he does that forever. And Camus says that we have to imagine Sisyphus smiling, or Sisyphus being happy in that situation. And that, if we want to tie it to stoicism, right, bearing your suffering in a noble way, not letting it kind of put you down,
Yes.
being able to maintain composure in difficult situations. I think there's some overlap there where we have to be Sisyphus, work against impossible odds, but be happy and satisfied in that process.
Because it's in the journey, and like it's in the experience of doing that.
Right.
Well, like the learning is.
Exactly. Yeah. I think you could say that's existentialism in a nutshell.
Yeah. So when I told some of my friends that I'm doing this interview with you, like everyone was asking about like your time management and like your fitness lifestyle.
Sure.
So let's go with them like one by one. Like when did your fitness journey start? And like
yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
So I want everyone to know that I was not fit my entire life or at all interested in physical fitness whatsoever for most of my early life, including high school and the rest. In fact, I was, kind of picked on a little bit because I was so extremely skinny. Like in certain phases of my line, I won't say anorexic because that's an actual condition, but like in some places really skinny. Yeah. And in some periods of my life, just sedentary. So it started actually quite late. I had, a few things here and there where I kind of experimented with
sports,
swimming. It never really stuck. But when I was 23 is when I started to really go to the gym.
Yes.
I'll tell you, if you want good motivation, go through a really difficult breakup.
Yes, I've heard that would help a lot.
Yes, exactly. Go for a breakup, hit your lowest point in life, and then, speaking about existentialism, stoicism, you start to evaluate what you need or what's important when you're stripped away of everything that supports you. And then you have to make some difficult choices. So at that point in my life, going to the gym was a form of, I would say, therapy. It was a form of, and there's good science and medical things to support the fact that, when you tear your muscle tissue, there's a release of not just endorphins, but all sorts of interesting hormones and endocrine system events that occur that really act as antidepressants. And there's good science to support this. So I was, without knowing it, really going to therapy. Releasing a lot of energy that I was having at the time, and then I just got hooked. It was, it was my source of happiness at the time, and it lasted. And so that's kind of how I built the framework. Where now I'm pretty rigorous with my routine. I think this year was probably where I've deviated the most from the routine because I've been so busy with the teaching and everything here. But I've come back to it, thankfully, now. But yeah, it's a fixture of my life, and it takes a while. Baby steps. Don't expect to, like you'll start going 7 times a week. Everything.
Rest and rest is pretty important.
Rest is huge. Yeah, rest is huge. But even for people out there who might be a little bit maybe intimidated or unsure if they can stick with the discipline or anything, I mean, just set something achievable for yourself 3 times a week or something. Get familiar with the gym surroundings.
Start adding it to your routine more and more. And then when you get hooked, like that's
precisely. And I will bid to anyone who's curious about this. I would bet that give it a month, do it for a month, and you will notice I don't do it for the physical benefits. I do it for the psychological benefits. Actually, you'll see that after a month of doing it, you will feel different. You will be more energetic. You will be more confident. You will bring that happiness to other domains of life because we need to be energized. I think there's a lot of separation of the mind and the body happening in modern life. And I think we need to
like you are sitting on a desk and like you are on your computer.
Precisely. And I think part of what the gym culture is doing is bridging those two things back together. And I think it's healthy. I think it leads to a lot of psychological benefits that are maybe sometimes untapped or unexplored. So that's kind of my story. That's my attitude. It's part of my philosophy of life, really.
It's also like, as you said, like when you put yourself in like difficult situations and like you have these small victories every day, they are going to add up on the long run. And like for a day-to-day basis, like you have this sense of fulfillment and you have this sense of like, okay, I achieved something. I went and like I did this and like I put myself in difficult situation. That's why when like actual difficult situation arise, you would kind of be not prepared, but like
Yeah.
you went through something during that day, which would help with that. So I
Yes.
think it helps yani to put yourself in these difficult situations.
I think so. It's sort of like the concept of hormesis, which is like a little bit of poisoning to build up the tolerance against poison. So
Yeah,
you can,
exactly,
if someone tries to poison you,
yeah,
it won't work.
exactly. Yeah,
It's like that. A little bit of stress that is enough for you to handle, but then builds up that stress tolerance over time. I notice, because since I was 23, I've been doing this. I've taken breaks. I've come back. I've been more or less disciplined with going to the gym, exercising.
yeah,
And I would say there's a real difference in terms of my ability to be emotionally stable. For like, say, if I don't work out for a month versus when I'm dialed in and going regularly,
yeah,
I can tell that something really impacts me.
yes,
I'm more vulnerable versus when I'm working out. It's like I process it, but I'm able to move forward with it. So the psychological benefits, I can't emphasize them enough. They're really there. And so,
what about tips that you have for people who wants to go, or like who actually go to the gym?
I'd say start with something basic, something that you can do. I would say that consistency is the number one thing. And if you can, we all learned at some point how to brush our teeth or how to tie our shoes. It's something like that where you do it for a month or so, it becomes part of your routine. So I would say scheduling and time management is actually probably the number one thing.
Yeah, that's my next step.
Good. We could talk about that. Yeah. And when you build it into your lifestyle as something that is non-negotiable, just like you wouldn't not shower if you go out, so that you don't stink up the place in the same way. You would you won't go about your life and your days without having a sweat session or something that energizes you physically, because I think it's that important. I don't think we're meant to be sitting for 8 hours. It's just not natural for us. So that would be my first number one recommendation, is just get used to it being a routine. Don't expect great miracles to happen right away, but you'll see in a few weeks' time it will start to reward you, and then you'll want to keep going because of those benefits. That's number one. And then of course we can get more detailed depending on how invested you want to be. We can start talking about diet. We can talk about all the rest, right? What kinds of workouts.
Like the whole trinity of like eat, rest, and like exercising.
And I have to think, I think a lot of people struggle with sleep. I would say that, especially if you're having issues with stress and anxiety, ooh man, you need your REM sleep. You need to detoxify your brain.
And like I'm also guilty of that as well. I'm trying to to do these so many things where the most thing that we sacrifice is sleep. So you would just push your bedtime. But like the thing is, like without enough sleep and rest, even if you go like 8 times a week to the gym, it's not gonna help. Like
you won't repair your body, and also you're gonna start to hate things, exactly, which is the worst part. Is like you're going to be exhausted, and so there might be times where you want to stretch and push, but as a overall as a lifestyle thing, 8 hours at least a night I think is important. And so sleep hygiene is a big thing too. I try to be, this helps with time management, by the way. Is the sleep hygiene, little things like, first of all, going to bed and waking up at the same time. I'll violate that rule if I have big deadlines. Of course, I can't always be perfect, but overall, if you go to bed and go to sleep at the same time, your circadian rhythms will start to set into place. And you'll notice that you can put your head on the pillow and you'll be asleep in like 30 seconds. It's beautiful. And you will get the most restful sleep. You will wake up feeling like a newborn baby. That's how good it can be. Things like not looking at screens or for about, like, let's say an hour before going to bed, right? Have a book. Dim the lights in your room. All of these things are, there's been studies done that even if there's a little bit of light shining on someone's like finger when they're asleep, it slightly disrupts their REM sleep. That's how sensitive we are to light. So a big aspect of getting good sleep is to dim the lights. I don't know if you like candles or whatever, just turn on your bedside lamp, but turn off the main lights, for example, for an hour before, and you'll start to sink into a kind of relaxed state that will help you fall asleep faster. And then before you know it, you don't even need to set an alarm. That's how smooth the machine is oiled.
Yes.
You can just wake up and go to bed, and you know your system already. And that's a foundation for everything else then too. You can manage your time, you can build around that, and it becomes easier when things are fixed. When there's a framework to your daily life, it makes the rest of the time management easier.
Yeah.
You know what's realistic versus, okay, that's going to take more time than I can handle. And so you can parse apart your tasks in a realistic way when you have that kind of something, habit that's reoccurring, a structure that's reoccurring.
How about dieting? Like how would you advise about that?
Dieting is a whole other rabbit hole. We can go.
That's
yes.
like the difficult stuff.
It's
not going to the gym. It's the diet that actually makes the difference.
Yeah. You can lose a lot of weight just by not even going to the gym. I still advise you do, but you can just manage your calories. Same building up mass. If you want to build muscle, but you don't give any fuel to do so,
you need to eat a lot.
I've been. Oh my goodness, the chicken breasts that I've eaten.
Yeah.
It can get dreary sometimes, but I've gotten really into some interesting corners of the diet question. There's all sorts of little camps people go take
to.
There's
the carnivore,
the keto, everything, and some people get really attached to their diets. So I've done all of those things. I've done keto. I had gastrointestinal issues for a long time, ulcerative colitis, which is pretty serious. And that's where I switched to carnivore, actually. That was a few years ago. It cleared up everything overnight. I had been on antacids. I had gone to multiple doctors. None of them could really solve it until I addressed the diet. And when I switched to carnivore, just to clear up the symptoms, to give myself the basic nutrition, but without irritating my gut, the symptoms went away, and it was amazing. So ever since then, I've been exploring all sorts of these alternative diets and seeing what works best. Nowadays, my diet is pretty restricted. I eat like the same thing every day for years. And there's not a lot of spices or salts or everything. It's because of, I need to handle my gut system needs to be right. So I think people would be a little bit weirded out by my diet. I don't recommend you go as extreme as I do. It took me a while to build up to this, but definitely be aware of what you put into your system. I would say at the very least whole foods. Try to avoid processed foods. I don't even do protein powders or anything else. I go old school, have raw eggs, lots of eggs. I go raw dairy, raw milk specifically. So some of my students may have seen me with a jug of milk. I get milk fresh from the cow, actually. And that way it's not pasteurized. There's certain enzymes that are missing during the pasteurization process, which makes the digestion more difficult. So a lot of people develop lactose intolerance
because of that.
Because of the pasteurization. And I would venture to say that if you try raw milk and, especially kefir, the raw milk that's been fermented a little bit, or like it's sat outside for a few days, the bacteria for that is so good for you,
and like it tastes so much better.
It does.
We bring out some, like we don't have it regular because like it's more difficult to get.
Yes,
like,
it is
pasteurized milk, but like once we get it at home, it tastes amazing.
It does.
And like you can make so many stuff out of it. We
cheese,
can make yogurt, cheese. We have this thing, I don't know if you know what it is, it's called gamer. So it's basically like I don't know how to describe it. Like you would boil the milk and then like you would like thicken it out, and it has like this cheese-like structure, and like you would eat it with like some honey or stuff. And
I may have tried it, although I didn't know what it was called at the time.
It's like pretty famous, like for like breakfast and like this kind of stuff. So it has so many applications to it, and like as I said, like the taste of the milk on its own, like
so
it's really tasteful. Like you can taste like it's something natural that's like produced from like a human organism, and it's not like machine factory,
not factory food. I'm big on that too. I'm big on knowing where the food comes from, on sourcing the food. Because I travel, that becomes difficult. But one of the first things I did when I came here to Suli was I need to find a farmer who has cows and see if I can hook up. I try to get friendly with the farmers wherever I go. So source the food, make sure it's coming from a good place. And that's everything, all the health stuff we've been talking about, from the mental stuff to the fitness, the exercise, to the diet, to the sleep. This is all part of the same thing we're talking about, which is living a good life, right? You miss up on something, you can make a sacrifice temporarily with something, but that's going to come back, and you're going to have to pay the price for some of the impulsive, things that you might put into your body that taste fantastic and great, but are not so good for you. So if you can find vegetables, if you can eat them whole, if you can eat meat that's coming from a good place, and if you can have dairy that's coming from a good place, and eggs, lots of eggs if you want to do the bodybuilding stuff especially, then I think you'll be in a good place. You won't wear your body out. Your body will thank you, and you'll have the fuel you need to work out properly too. So
it has like you pay the price like initially, but then like the reward and like the thing, it's amazing. So I want to talk about movies and TV shows.
Let's do it.
Lastly, what's your favorite movie?
Oh, that's a great question. It's been a while since I've watched anything that I've liked in terms of movies. There's definitely some favorites, and I'd have to dig them out of the vault of my memories.
Yes,
but they're out there. I think the easier, and maybe I can think of a movie, but definitely what comes to mind in terms of TV shows is The Wire.
Yes.
I don't know if have you had the pleasure of watching The Wire?
No, not yet. I like last summer I watched The Sopranos.
Oh, The Sopranos is good.
And now hopefully like this next summer The Wire.
Good. Coming from me, that is some of the best storytelling I've ever seen ever. I've watched a lot of great shows, but that takes the cake. So I think you're in for a treat if you're going to watch The Wire. I recommend it to anyone.
Yes.
It's amazing. So The Wire would probably be my favorite TV show. And movies, man, it's been a long time. Some of the Nolan films, Christopher Nolan films, are pretty good.
Are you excited for Oppenheimer, his new one?
Yeah, I haven't even heard much about it. I'm sure it's going to be great.
Yeah.
Nolan's good at what he does, so I'll check it out whenever I have a chance to. Yeah. Interstellar was pretty good. I'm trying to feel out. The Prestige was a pretty solid movie as well. And I'm sure if I can keep thinking, more will come up. What about you? Do you have a favorite film, favorite show?
Yeah. Like for me, for the film, it's like Cinema Paradiso. It's like where everything started. And like with a TV show, I have three in mind. Like I always go back and forth with. Like I have The Office, which we talked about, because like it's really helpful to know that even at like your shittiest and like your worst days, you can have some comfort zone or like comfort show to go back to and like have a meal with, and like it would take your mind off things for a while.
That's true.
And I really enjoy Dark, the German TV show. Have you heard about it?
Dark is the name.
Yeah.
I don't think I have.
Yeah, it's a German 3-season TV show, and it's about like time travel and like bootstraps paradox and like these like highly philosophical time stuff, and like a really interesting story, and like it stars and like ties everything at the end perfectly, and like it's so much fun to see these characters and like how they interact in a language that you're not familiar with, which is like German. So it's really a treat to watch that. And it's like only 3 seasons, but like the content of each episode is pretty condensed. That's why like by the time that I reached to season 3 and like before it was released, like I recapped the previous 2 seasons, and I like had notes on the character of everything, because like you see these characters that are going back to the and like next, and so it's
great.
It's really complicated to watch as well.
Nice. Rewarding though, I'm sure.
And I also really enjoy Succession.
The show you were telling me about.
Succession is like one of my favorites, and like I hope I can finish it like this whole day, because like season 3, like which is the last one as well, like started airing this semester, and like I'm not in a good mood to watch a good TV show now.
I see.
So I need to get back to that.
Get back into the zone.
Yeah.
I remember a movie that I watched. One of my favorites, I would say, is No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's one of my absolute favorites.
Yeah.
It's also based on a book by one of my favorite authors, Cormac McCarthy.
Yes.
Who's one of my favorite authors too. So I would say that that's one of my favorites. And since we're talking about movies, this just randomly popped into my mind. I remember that have a friend, a childhood friend from back in Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
I'm still in touch with him. He is involved in the movie industry there, sort of a small kind of indie movie company.
Yeah.
And I'm helping him this summer with a screenplay.
Yes.
That we're working on together. And it's going to be in a genre I don't necessarily enjoy all that much, which is the zombie genre.
Okay.
Zombie films.
Yeah.
I think there's some value, but I think it gets overdone, right?
Yeah.
I think it's difficult to innovate in that kind of story.
Yes, because like you have a structure that has been like furthered out by many movies and TV shows.
It's difficult to find new ground. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So that'll be the challenge this summer. I'll be helping him out with that and seeing, storyboarding, screenplay writing for that. So that just came to mind today.
For talking about like zombie genres, like we have TV shows like The Walking Dead that took that idea and like how to actually live in such a time and place.
Right.
Whereas like some other approaches to that were like, I think it was called Shaun of the Dead, something like this.
There's Shaun of the Dead. There's Hot Fuzz as well as another one that's not a zombie movie.
They took a comedic approach to it, whereas like this, there's another one that's called Warm Bodies, I think, that took it in like a romantic sense, where like a girl falls with like a zombie boyfriend or stuff. So like there has been multiple approaches to it, but have you seen Mad Max?
Yes.
Fury Road?
Yeah, well, that if we're gonna talk about like favorite movies, that one's up there.
Yeah,
that one's a good
exactly.
one.
So that's a pretty interesting take. It's not entirely zombies; it's more like apocalyptic stuff. But like I was watching, like I loved it when it like got released, and like I kept rewatching it ever since.
That's a great one.
So like the main beauty behind like that movie, it's like how simple the story is.
Yes.
Like we have this apocalyptic universe where like there is this one character who's like living his last days, and he wants to have like a successor after him before he dies, and like he holds control of the most valuable resource, which is water.
Yes.
So like there comes like Max and like his whole journey, and it's like when you see the story as like a whole big thing, it's so simple. They just go to a place and like but it is such an amazing movie. It is. And like sometimes the beauty is within the simplicity of things. And like as like Pam said it, like there's a lot of beauty in ordinary things. So I think definitely sometimes going with a simple contained approach would be better than trying to go over the top and like.
I think you're right. I think in something like that will probably be my approach for this little project of mine that I'm working on with my friend. I think you're right, and I think people are kind of losing track of the basics in many ways and going back to like really good, honest, old-fashioned storytelling.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I think is coming back, and I think is always powerful. What is a story even? I mean, that's a whole question. A story, we live in terms of stories, right? That's why we can watch 2 hours and it makes complete sense. Like the arcs, the rising, the denouement, the climax, it all makes sense. It's a grammar of human life, you might say, because we go through stories, we encounter challenges, we have to make difficult decisions, and then if we make the right decision, we reach it, and there's some sort of climactic moment where we change, become a new person.
If we make a mistake, we would learn from it and like make a better decision next time.
Yeah, and we become transformed each time, because that's what all the characters do in these stories. Is they're faced with some sort of a conflict or a decision or turmoil. They go back and forth, and then at the climactic moment, they make a choice for one or the other side. It's either a tragedy or a comedy. It's a bad ending or a good ending, or it's ambiguous, but they change. They always change. It's like, I think of stories as a structure of change. How does a person undergo a transformation?
Yes.
And I think when we recognize that grammar is everywhere and we stay true to it and explore it rather than trying to reinvent the wheel or constantly innovate to the point of...
You can do that, but I think when you start like in the beginning, like stick to the basics.
I think so too.
I think a very interesting case to take here is Nolan and like how he started versus like how he's going now. Like he started with like I think $20,000 US for like his budget, and like they were shooting with like his friends on weekends.
Right.
But now like he has like these multi-millions, highly like he has like whatever actor he wants, like on his arsenal. So like just sticking to the basic and providing a good actual story is like the thing that's gonna make it, especially within the beginning.
And it's more difficult than you think to do just even a basic story. You think, oh, it's been done a million times. You sit down and try to come up with one. There's a, you know, it resists, it pushes back. It doesn't, you can't just make anything up. There is a logic to it. And it's
you need to be aware of the elements and what's gonna work with people and what's not.
Precisely. So story structure is fascinating.
Yes, it is. Before we wrap this up, tips for time management.
Tips for time management. I'm glad we're ending on some practical takeaways that are useful. Well, it's a lifelong process. You have to ease into it. But here are a few things that have worked for me. And what is time management? First of all, I think we need to understand what we're doing before we can give advice. And I think time management is how much do you value your life?
Yes.
I know that sounds kind of crazy, but what is it that we have? The number one resource is our life, our time, and we're mortal. We're all going to die, so our time is limited. So how you choose to use your time is a reflection of what it is you value most in life and the expression of your life. What do you want to do with this time? And when you understand that that's what's at stake, your very life, right, and your identity, you start to fight for it. You start to push back against everything that wants to steal your time away from you, or kind of, right, and you start to assert yourself, build boundaries. And part of that is, that's what time management is. It's the art of living. It's the art of like prioritizing what's important versus what's inessential, which is a lifelong process, right? So practical tips, once you've understood that's what's at stake, it's your life, it's short, it's precious. Every minute can be, a moment of beauty if we use it right. So I think number one, I would say is, have a schedule. Your schedule should be your friend, not your enemy, not your tyrant whipping you. It's an assistant to help you realistically assess how much can you do and plan ahead. If you can have foresight, you know what's happening in a week from now, and you're not taken by surprise. That's part of it. I generally don't like to use too much technology in my life, but one thing that is, there's Google Calendar, and you can do repeating tasks. And if you just even are able to visualize your week, it changes everything, right? Okay, this is what's coming up. It helps you with the thing I talked about earlier, which is going to bed and waking up at the same times. Yeah. I heard somewhere that if you can control the beginning of your day and you can control the end of your day,
everything is between.
You have it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the hardest thing for people is to set a time and go to bed consistently, wake up. I know, because there's so many things to do. I understand that. Yeah. But if you can actually trick yourself into doing it for a time, you will find that your amount of time opens up. You have more free time. You're not putting out fires, doing damage control. So if you can control your bedtime, your wake up time, that would be one tip.
Yeah.
Google Calendar, have a schedule that you use. Number two. And then I think be realistic with yourself. When I first started scheduling time management and all of that, I
finished 3 essays, write a book
every day.
Direct a movie.
Exactly. And then you would get so upset with yourself when you don't finish it. So be realistic and understand that probably you can do about maybe 2 hours, depending on what you're doing. You can maybe do 2 hours of work or something, and then you're going to be mentally exhausted. Well, plan out a little break, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, go for a walk, something like that, and make that part of your schedule. Schedule fun things too. Schedule events with friends, like, oh, let's go hang out here. Let's go to this, interesting new art gallery event. Like, plan the fun things too. Yes. And you won't always hit your timeline exactly, but you will have a skeleton and you'll have a structure that you can deviate from and come back to that will give you vision. When you can control your time, your short-term time, you have a platform upon which to build longer-term plans. Yeah. You can see the future clearly now. So structure is key for that. Otherwise, we're lost in a sea. And I know what that's like.
Yeah.
So
you are just catching up to stuff.
You're reactive. Reactive. Whereas to be creative, proactive, you have to decide when you're going to do things. You have to be your own manager. Yeah. And I think
you have to be a good manager and a good employee.
Yes. If you can unite those two, it's the art and the critic, right?
Yes,
if you can
exactly.
Those two
to that
argument
again.
Exactly. So those are my tips.
Those are all great tips. Any final remarks before we wrap this up?
I just had a good time, and I'm grateful to be here. I'm happy we were able to
Same
make a
here.
time.
It was like a great conversation, and
was.
thank you for being here.
I'll be happy if you want to in the future do this again.
Of course. For everyone listening, thanks for like investing the time, and like have a good day. Bye bye.
Take care.